Ladies and gentlemen, I am finally not sick anymore, which means we are about to break down the NHL Prospects Tournament. Now, over the last week, we saw most NHL teams hosting their prospect tournaments, putting a bunch of their best prospects against each other to really see what they're made of. And this tournament is always fascinating because we really see the great prospects rise up to the very top, and it gives us a good look into the Calder race and which prospects could surprise for NHL roster spots. So that begs the question, of course, who surprised me, who impressed me the most over the last week, and who do I think could be sneaky picks to make the NHL this next year? Well, make sure you guys watch till the end because we're going to be going through everything, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. Now, disclaimer, I wasn't able to watch every single team in every single game. It's September, guys. I'm sorry. But going on what I've seen, what I've watched, and what I've paid attention to, these are the prospects that have impressed me the most so far, or ones I just want to talk about. Let's start out with the Chicago Blackhawks prospects here today, and we're going to go into two guys that really aren't much of a surprise. Impressing me the most was Sam Rinzel and Oliver Moore. A bit of a shout out to Lefebvre, who had some good moments, but I think Rinzel and Moore, they're the two that I think really stood out to me. Rinzel was one of the most impressive players in the last week with just how he was able to control the game versus St. Louis. That assist he had was just marvelous, and I think this is somebody that is primed for a fantastic rookie year, and I've talked about it before on this channel and in tweets as well, that I think he's a low-key Calder candidate. I think ultimately it will end up being Demidov that ends up taking it, but if Rinzel's number 2 in the conversation, or even wins it somehow if we see an injury or something, I would not be shocked whatsoever. Especially since his draft year, he has grown so much in his physicality, in his anticipation, and how much pace he brings to the game. He's always kind of been this unicorn type of player, but that strength that he's added on too, he's bulked up about 20 pounds over the last couple of years. It's really showing, and I think especially in the NHL this next year, we're going to see Rinzel translate pretty perfectly. On top of just how well he translated immediately after the NCAA this last year, getting 5 assists, 5 points in 9 games. I think we're just going to see that continue in his trajectory. Somebody that had a lot more to prove, though, was Oliver Moore, another first-rounder by Chicago back in 2023. He's somebody that's always had immense skill, and especially with that speed, can be a game breaker, but finding that consistency and that actual game-to-game pace has kind of been a bit of an issue for him. I think at times I've wanted to see more out of him consistently, and hopefully this year that we see it, I think he's definitely earned a good chunk of NHL games this next year, but I do want to see him have the best path for development because I don't know if he's completely ready for an 82-game NHL season, but boy, did he look good, had that stellar overtime winner, using that speed in a good way. Just want to see it every shift, man, because when Moore is at his best, this guy can be one of the best players out there. Now let's move on to the Ottawa Senators. I'm just going in a random order here, but there was quite a few players that impressed me. The first one that I wanted to shout out was Jackson Parsons, somebody that looked terrific in his game. As a goalie, he's not going to get a huge opportunity in the tournament, but the game he played, he looked stellar in it, and he's kind of gone under the radar when it comes to the goalie prospects out there, but it's somebody that got signed out of the OHL by Ottawa and put up some great numbers there for Kitchener, a .920 save percentage in 52 games last year. Yeah, he was an older goaltender for it, but hey, he continues to put up pretty solid numbers, and especially for a goaltender out of Canada, that's about as good as you can ask for, especially for a 6'2", 203 goalie. Checks the boxes there in terms of the size, but I thought looked incredible, really stole the show in a massive way. So hey, if he's able to become a maybe future NHL backup or something, that's not a bad pull. The jury's still out, but over the past few seasons, even though I'm not really sure what to make of him, I've always enjoyed watching Parsons play. He's always been a goaltender that has gotten a big workload and has done pretty well with it. So hopefully in Belleville this next season, we'll see him take a step, and who knows, maybe Ottawa has something here. Onto a player that is a lot less surprising to see a good tournament out of him, and that is Yakemchuk. He wasn't going to play every single game because for a player like this, you kind of want to have him a little bit more ready for training camp. But about in the game that Yakemchuk did play, he looked pretty good. He got 2 goals, and offensively was really able to show what Yakemchuk does best, the dangling, the deception. When he does have the puck on his stick, he can be an absolute wizard out there, and with that size, it's very tantalizing. I will say, there were still a couple moments defensively where I wanted him to be a little more engaged. That's kind of my biggest problem I keep coming back to in his game, but still, when Yakemchuk is at his best, he was able to show what he was made of, but I think training camps and making an impression in the NHL will be the bigger focus for Yakemchuk, besides a prospect tournament that he was always going to be pretty good at. And I will say this, even though I think it would have been disastrous if he didn't, I think Tyler Boucher has looked pretty good. The physicality was there. That, of course, is his brand, but he also had that big-time goal and showed a little bit more offense than he usually does. I get he's a 10th overall pick that's 22 years old. It would have been horrible if he didn't look good in the prospect tournament, but hopefully it's something to build on, man, because this guy needs something. Moving on to the Calgary Flames and a couple standout prospects to me. First, I want to talk about Matvei Gridin, somebody that has always been a bit of an under-the-radar prospect when maybe he shouldn't be. He was a 28th overall pick, so pretty high up in the 2024 draft, but hasn't gotten a lot of attention, maybe just because the World Juniors aren't there and he doesn't get the opportunity to cook for Russia. But you see in back-to-back seasons, stellar production in the USHL and the QMJHL, plus a great QMJHL playoffs. He's something that will be in the AHL this next season, which is a pretty big jump up for him, but he looks stellar. He was something that, especially for the Flames, looked to just be the most dominating forward shift after shift, and that is exactly what I want to see, because this is another player that has big-time potential, is very slick with the way he moves, but that skill set, especially in tight situations, has kind of always gotten a little bit overlooked, but I think Calgary has a really interesting middle six here coming up. If you want even more entertainment, this time from the defensive end, we go on to Hunter Brzustewicz, who is always one of the most fun players to watch. Yes, he has some defensive deficiencies sometimes, and they can be loud and clear, but he is a player that is just a rock star with any open ice that you end up giving him, especially in the power play. He's something that I thought looked pretty good in his first AHL season, 32 points in 70 games, but he was controlling the play for the Flames whenever he stepped on the ice. It was just magical to see. I don't think he's going to be in the NHL this next year just because you have Sam Perek there already as an emerging right shot D there that is a lot more offensive. So I see Calgary taking the chance on him a lot more easily, but this is somebody that I think in maybe a year could already be in the NHL after another good AHL season, and somebody definitely to keep an eye on. Even if, again, there are some defensive problems here and there, I think it's a little bit less than I was expecting it to be at the AHL, which it's pretty interesting. On the defensive side, Sam Dickinson being as good as he was no surprise. I think he had like a 4-point game or something. He was just ridiculous. I mean, Dickinson, again, should be dominating this tournament, 11th overall pick, but still somebody that I think was imposing as well, and I think showed exactly the progression in his game over the last year. He's somebody that I liked a lot in his draft season, but sometimes made some clumsy decisions with the puck, sometimes defensively wasn't as engaged as I wanted him to be, but I think what we saw this last year in the OHL, he's just been carrying it over throughout the entire time with his experience in San Jose's system now. It sucks because Dickinson might have to be forced between the NHL or the OHL this next season, but just like a Michael Misa, I think Dickinson is starting to get to a level where it'll be kind of impossible to send him back to the OHL. He has nothing to learn there whatsoever, but I think he's starting to prove more and more that he could be capable of an NHL roster spot this next year, which would be huge for the Sharks. They already have so much talent. Imagine having both Misa and Dickinson and the full-time lineup this next year. I mean, the Sharks become must-watch hockey for me. I mean, they already were because I love the Sharks, but even more so now. On to the LA Kings, only one player I want to mention here, but it's Carter George on the goaltending side. He looked magnificent versus Anaheim. Only allowed one goal, but it was just domination from start to finish. He's always been a goaltender that I've liked, but maybe not loved every single time I've watched him, but it seems like whenever the lights get brighter, he just gets better with the moments, and that's going to reward him quite a bit once he does get to the pros and eventually the NHL. On to the St. Louis Blues, one name I wanted to mention as kind of a bounce-back candidate is Adam Jiricek, somebody that I think really needs a win of a season coming up, but I thought looked great. Really, besides the Oliver Moore overtime goal, I thought he looked stellar, and in the minutes he played, some pretty big ones. He was under the radar, but really just got the job done completely. I think that is Jiricek at his best when you don't really notice him as much, trying to use more of that physicality, use more of that defensive acumen to his advantage. He's somebody that in the OHL this last year wasn't really able to put up the greatest season in the world, didn't play much either, but this next year, hopefully we'll see that turn the page a little bit. Onto the Pittsburgh Penguins, one name I wanted to give a special shout out to that I thought looked really great was Avery Hayes. Now, he's a 22-year-old that has already played 2 years in the AHL, plus a really good one, getting 23 goals and 42 points in 60 games last year already. So in this tournament, when you're facing against a lot younger competition, I would expect Hayes to look pretty good, but I just always come around to Hayes whenever I see him somehow, and I just see a future fourth liner here. I think he's just one of those guys that just has so much determination, such a great work ethic, and on the ice, it really shows itself consistently. I just wouldn't be surprised if he's a fourth liner someday, somebody that just wins minutes whenever he gets it, carves his way into an NHL role, and plays a good amount of NHL games coming out of nowhere. Onto the Philadelphia Flyers, my standout to them all throughout was Denver Barkey. Not really much of a surprise because I absolutely adore this dude, but still, I think Denver Barkey is just going to quickly become one of those Brad Marchand-like, somebody that just has so much intensity, such a way of getting under your skin so cleanly, so effectively, that gets under the light of referees. He's just, I don't even know how to describe him, man. He is just blissful to watch, somebody that will be a devastating player to play against if you're not a Flyers fan, but if you are a Flyers fan, it's quickly going to become an instant fan favorite. On to another smaller but very aggressive forward. We go on to Luca Pinelli of the Columbus Blue Jackets, somebody that I think had 6 points over the week, and I thought looked exactly like he has been over the past couple of years. Somebody that production-wise isn't going to blow you away or anything, but I think always just gets the job done and is such an easy player for coaches to trust. I mean, there's a reason why he was on the World Juniors team, even though it was a bit of a shock at the time, but he's somebody that was able to jump into the AHL at the end of this last season. It looked pretty good in the playoffs, 4 points in 6 playoff games too. Somebody that I think is going to have a full season, hopefully, with Cleveland this next year. But this is somebody that I think could really carve out a bottom 6 center role. Somebody that can win faceoffs effectively, brings just so much intensity. And especially for a team like Columbus, they love these type of guys in their bottom 6. I think Pinelli's going to fit right at home in probably 2027 if I were to bet. Going on to the Detroit Red Wings, the second to last team I'll mention here, I did want to talk about Shai Buam, who is another defenseman I would say that goes under the radar, doesn't get a lot of attention, and maybe rightfully so because the production hasn't been unbelievable or anything, but he's somebody that I think has always just had stellar defensive habits, has always been somebody who's been rock solid in those big moments, and going onto the AHL, I thought he had a solid rookie season, 25 points in 67 games, transitioning on that defense well, and will still likely be playing for the Griffins this next season, but he's somebody to keep an eye out on. He had a couple of big goals this last week, looked really effective in all 3 zones, so getting that offense a little bit higher end will kind of be the big difference maker, but he's somebody that also that I mean could maybe fit into the Red Wings' third pair as that lefty in a couple of years' time. Somebody that just ends up coming onto the NHL one day and doesn't look back. Now moving on to the Montreal Canadiens as the last team to talk about here. Of course, I watched a ton of their prospect tournament, which featured some ups and downs. It was a weird one. But of course, when it comes to the ups, it's pretty much always going to be around Ivan Demidov. He was basically as you'd expect, if not a little bit better, honestly, playing against guys that aren't really NHLers most of the time. He was just dominant. I mean, he made a prospect like Braden Yeager absolutely look silly around the net with his dangles, which, again, isn't surprising me by any means, but I'm glad to see more of the world awake to what Demidov is capable of. All I know is that Ivan Demidov is sick. He was imposing his will, had the entire Bell Center around the tip of his finger. It was just incredible to watch, but are we really shocked? It's Ivan Demidov. Of course he did. A little bit more shocking was just how solid Florian Xhekaj looked. He is somebody that is looking to prove me quite a bit wrong. I wasn't the biggest fan of him as a 4th rounder just because he was such a raw player at the time, but he's really been able to improve his pace, especially with the decision making, and become a little bit more of an adaptable player, especially around the net. But the goal scoring was terrific in the AHL this last year, not playing a ton of minutes, but looking really good in those minutes. He was really good around Ivan Demidov, which, sure, Demidov can make quite a few players look good. I think Xhekaj kind of knew his role on that line and stood out effectively. There were a couple times in the tournament maybe where he still looked like he could use a bit more foot speed, but I'm nitpicking because he looked brilliant, and especially as a complimentary type of wing was kind of exactly what they needed. We'll see what happens when it comes to this next year in the AHL if he can keep the momentum going, but I think he projects well as kind of this more physical, grounded 4th line. On the defensive end, I also want to give some flowers here to Owen Protz, who, yeah, I think was pretty much just Owen Protz, but I think was able to bring even more electricity with the game that he provides. He's always been super physical, always let to lay big hits out, but he was doing that in droves for Montreal this last week. It was basically, in the games he was playing, basically every single shift he was looking to murder somebody out there, which is always a lot of fun. I don't see a ton of offense in Protz's future, and I think most likely he does cap out as maybe like a 6th defenseman, probably more as like a number 7 depth D, but at the same time, if you can have somebody you can plug and play in your lineup like this, that can just bring so much physicality and not be too much of a detriment in his own end, you're doing pretty good in that spot. Now, I want to mention David Reinbacher here because there's been so much conversation around him over the last week here with the ups and downs. He looked really good in the first game, had some brutal moments here and there, and kind of had some rough turnovers, some rough moments, and got absolutely dangled out of his jock strap in that second game he played. And I think the conversation around Reinbacher, he's just one of those players. He's becoming one of those prospects that the conversation, the discourse around him, it kind of distracts from the player that Reinbacher actually is. I still think it's a shame that Reinbacher had to go 5th overall because, again, if this guy went 16th, around the range that I had him in my rankings, I think we'd all be looking at him as a pretty interesting prospect. Somebody that has a lot of potential defensively. With his skating, it's absolutely marvelous, and what he's capable of when he is at his best is pretty decent. And that's kind of the thing with Reinbacher, is I think some of those defensive mistakes are overshadowing just how good a lot of the body of work ends up being. I think what it did tell us is that he's not quite as NHL ready as some people might have said. But at the end of the day, he was a player that I wanted to see be in the AHL again this next year to have a fully healthy season. That's what I've been wanting for all this time, and we have yet to see that. So just give him a full year in the AHL, let him actually play and be the #1 guy. It's unfortunate that wasn't the case this last year, but at the same time, that's the reality. And I think the patience that Montreal gives him will be good for him in the end. I think Reinbacher still projects very well as a middle pair, dependable skating first defenseman that really is able to eat a ton of minutes and win 95% of them, let's say. Even for 5th overall, it might have been a bit rich for me. I still think he'll be a core part of that Habs lineup, even if he might not be a total bust or a total savior. Reinbacher is still a very good player, and at the end of the day, let's just give him some patience, man. But those are a lot of my thoughts on this year's NHL Prospect Tournaments. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe and the notification bell. Comment down below all your thoughts on your team, how you think they performed, what prospects surprised you, maybe disappointed you. Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, should every all the hockey fans you guys know online, especially the prospect fans, to get the news out there to them. And make sure you click on this card for all of my prospect talk right in one playlist. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And even though I'm not very sick, my throat really, really hurts right now. So I'm going to go, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.